Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode.
Welcome back to Where They're Planted. In today's episode, I want to talk about some ideas around leadership parenting and what that means to lead sort of through our actions in our parenting, and some concrete ideas of how we do that and why this is so important for our kids. So this might be a bit of a vulnerable topic. When I talk to a lot of parents, this idea of sort of putting the reflection back on how we're modeling and what our actions are can be a little bit tricky to be able to reflect on what we struggle with as a parent, and also to, at the same time, sit with what we hold dear to us in our job as parents. And so, whether you're listening today because you're smack in the middle of parenting a 1-year-old who is just starting to move and have opinions of their own, or whether you're parenting, a 9, 10-year-old who is trying to figure out where their place in the world is, or if you're parenting a late teenager or young adult who is really starting to probably emulate some of the ways you modeled in parenting, this idea of showing up as a leader through our modeling is really important. So we're going to define what that means. The other thing that's really important about this is when parents talk to me about, tricky behaviors or tricky moments that are going on with their kids, it is true. This concept is true whether you're parenting, a really even temperament child, or one who's neurodivergent, or one who is easily distressed with expectations or challenges. All of it is true that we still know that leading through our actions as parents is a core foundation to finding success. And so let's get started by talking about what leadership in parenting is. And really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this concept is one of the parenting styles that has been researched in the past and is well known, and that is the authoritative parenting style. For a little bit of knowledge and background, there are 3 parenting styles. There's authoritative, which is that ability to be with. It's the power with. It's the middle. It's the ability for there to be even representation, even exchange between the parent and child dynamic. The second one that sometimes is defined, or that's defined in the literature at least, is called the permissive parent. And what the permissive parent is where the parent tends to hand over the leadership or the decision-making or the guidance to the child. And so the parent in the permissive role is really looking to the child in order to know what to do. And then the third parenting style that is spoken about in the literature is the authoritarian parenting style. Now, I know these 2 words are really similar. I like to call it power over parenting is the authoritarian. And what that is leading without the balance of either modeling what we're asking our kids to do and or hearing our child's experience and honoring their experience. And so authoritarian some of the words that come up are, you will do as I say because I said so, or I know better than you, or do as I say and not as I do, right? So some of those are some of the old tenets that we hear around authoritarian parenting. So what I'm talking about today is what is authoritative. I like to call it power with, and leading through our power with parenting and what that means. And so what it really means is each person in the relationship, parent and child, is able to show up and be seen. Now, where this gets exciting and where this is an important strategy and support and something to really think about in your parenting is the other piece of authoritative parenting is that it is our leadership through our actions that really support our kids' learning. And so what I'm talking about here is how we model the behaviors we're hoping to see, how we model the values that we're hoping to hold true in our parenting, right? As parents, we are trying to raise these tiny little creatures that come out completely helpless into strong, independent, thoughtful humans as they turn to adults that hopefully hold some of the values that are important to you. And so when I think about this leading through our actions as parents, some of the reflections I like to think about are when there is distress in the relationship, right? And sometimes there's distress that happens all day long, every day. How are we modeling for our kids how we show up in our distress, right? How are we modeling how we actively take care of ourselves in those moments of distress? How are we modeling how we hope that we communicate through kindness and consistency? The other piece of modeling is the ability to set effective and strong boundaries. And so what does that mean when we're leading through this as parents? When we're parenting our kids, right, we know that it's exhausting. Oh my gosh, so much of the time is exhausting. And sometimes that idea of, if I hold to this line that's really important from my parenting values, it's going to make my life really hard. An example might be, it's important for me that my child is done with their phone, with their screen use at 8 p.m. at night because I want them to be able to get ready for bed. The modeling and the boundary is that we're going to turn the screens off at 8 p.m. So if that's a boundary you've set as a parent because of your values, either because of good sleep hygiene or because of connection or because of many other reasons, that is one that we think about. Now, as a parent, to set that boundary, it's also important to consider how we're modeling how we might work through something like that. I have lived this one in my house because sometimes a boundary or a value that I'm trying to set is that when somebody's communicating with us, that we're actually actively engaged, that I could be actively engaged with you while you're communicating with me. And sometimes I really want to finish that work email while one of my kids are trying to tell me the story of their day. And I might have heard this story 15 times already in different iterations, and it's important to me to finish that email. And when I really take a step back and I consider this concept that we're talking about today, I think about, am I modeling what I'm expecting of my kids? And in that moment, no, I'm not. I'm not modeling that. I'm telling them to put their phones down at dinner, but when they're telling me something that is actually really important to them from their day, I'm modeling actually something very different. And so there's no shame there. The other thing with parenting and with leading through our actions is to be giving ourselves compassion that things are hard and we're not always going to do it right. It's also wise to have a conversation either with yourself or your child, depending on how old they are, of how important this is. What are other options that we can do in order to be showing what we're hoping that they're instilling in themselves? And so when we're trying to set that boundary of screens off at 8 p.m., A, how are we modeling it for ourselves? B, are we able to sit in that authoritative leadership stance of, you know what, kiddo, I'm setting this boundary, and I can be here with you in order to help you work through the big feelings that you might have around that. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it. Let's find some connection and maybe eventually a little bit of joy as we move through this boundary together, which is modeling that ability to tolerate and handle the distress of a boundary. It's joining with our child as we're setting the example of how we intend to be in this world. This is not easy work. We're not always going to get it right. And so I always think for parents when I'm considering how we lead through example is to be really clear with yourself about which things are your focus in the moment and which things make sense to let go of. I know in some families' homes, letting go of some of the bigger chores might be something that some families choose to do so that they can focus on the kind words, the connections together, the transitioning to and from school, the ability to have quiet downtime together. For some families, that isn't the way that they're going to want to go. But for some families, leading through example of we need to get outside once during the day in order to create some ease and some openness and some boredom, some good boredom, like I spoke about on a previous podcast, is the way I want to be leading in my example and through my actions. And so I encourage you to take some time to be incredibly intentional about sitting firmly in our leadership as parents. I think that is one of the most difficult things to do is finding that stability in our intentions. It's so easy when our kids are distressed or when we're exhausted to second guess, to get really wishy-washy about what's important, to maybe let the conversations of society, connections, family members get in our ear, and the intentionality around how do I want my child to watch me show up and how do I want to lead what our days look like. I think of this as when I think of this intentionality of, being, kind of that firm leadership role as a parent, I always come up with the image of a big giant tree, like a big oak tree. And that idea that we as parents are those touch trees. So the touch tree is a tree that if you're lost in the forest or if you're trying to navigate, is the tree that you continue to come back to because you can find it over and over again because it's prominent in the space that you're in. And I always think of that idea of the touch tree or the grounding tree as us as parents, is that we want these incredibly deep, deep, deep roots, that in deep intentionality, that deep sitting in our values, so that when things get windy and wavy and the storms come, because they always do, that we're able to sort of stay in that grounded place for our kids, that they're able to continue to find us in our groundedness, even when we might feel uncertain or when we're having a really bad day or when we really messed up and, maybe yelled at our kids or, did something inconsistent or couldn't show up and be empathetic in the way that we intended to. And the other thing that this grounded intentionality does is it allows us to make a choice. It allows us to make a choice if we're going to fall into the patterns of parenting that were given to us. We were all given patterns of parenting, the good, the bad, the useful, the not useful. That was given to us through how we were parented as children. And I think that there is power to intentionally making that decision of what pieces you want to hold on to and what pieces you don't in your decision making, because the beauty of having an adult brain is that we get to make choice. Our adult brains are on enough that we get to make choice of how we show up for our kids. Again, it's a work in progress, but we get to make that choice each and every day. And so when I really think about this leadership parenting, in most aspects, as we make choices, intentional choices, in most aspects of our lives, our jobs, our adult relationships, there are these natural opportunities for learning, right? We might go to school or go to classes in order to be able to do our job effectively. We might be able to access, therapy for our adult relationships. We might be able to even access therapy for our kids to help understand them better. But where in our parenting is that natural learning and that natural ability? And so one thing I think about in my work as a parent coach is taking that time, if you're seeking somebody to do it with you in parent coaching, take the focus off of just our children's behaviors, because, right, there is a place and a time for that, and we need to do that to some extent, and their developmental patterns, and bringing it back to that focus of ourselves and how we choose to show up, how we choose to make decisions, what our values are, to determine where the edges are that are important to us as parents so that we can lead through our actions. In parent coaching, in the work that I do with parents around this topic, it isn't intended to replace the therapy of understanding your experience of being parented, right? It's not about digging into your childhood and making sense of it. It's about knowing how you were parented. Okay, this is what I remember. But it's also about moving forward. It's also not about just giving strategies, right? We know in our work, I have seen over the years that if I hand a parent a list of 5 strategies, that's one thing. But let's be real, that same strategies applied in the same way is rarely going to work consistently over time. Instead, it's the focusing on setting the container for how you intend to parent. And this is the topic of our leadership parenting. This is how you intend to show up so that you have the skills in order to be able to adapt and be that touch tree for your child who's growing and changing. And sometimes there's managing through the storms. The other thing I find that we do in parent coaching that can help with this leadership piece is not only providing the knowledge and the understanding of these concepts that are important in parenting, right? It's regulation, communication, boundaries, emotions, but helping create that thread between the things you learn and know and how you want to show up in the interactions with it. It's one thing to have the information on board, but if the intentionality and the ability to model those pieces aren't in place, it's challenging to be able to see the change and to be able to truly support the change in our kids. And the other thing I think about, as we think about parent coaching and kind of how this applies to leadership and parenting, is just as I spoke about the authoritative parenting style, where it's power with and being able for everybody to be seen, parent coaching gives you a place to truly be seen in your parenting experience and work through the responses and strategies that pull at you in the moment. It's that ability to practice the back and forth, to be able to gain the confidence, to be able to do the back and forth with your child in a way that's regulated and connected. So we know that the biggest teacher for our children is how we model through our words and our actions, and how we are able to truly see our kids' experiences, and how we create that sense of safety and known in your daily lives. And so some questions to consider as you think about leadership in your current parenting or any intent you have to move maybe more fully towards this. Some of the reflections that you might want to consider are: how often do the actions in your own life mirror the way that you're asking your child to be in life, right? Are you seeing a mirror of, yeah, I'm doing the things I'm asking my child to do? And I don't mean, that we're both getting up and getting dressed in the morning. I mean that I'm able to find delight in the outside, in nature, if I'm asking my child to just go outside and play, or that I am able to sit quietly and reflect after a long day, if I'm asking my child to just wait or calm down a little bit. Another question I would have you consider reflecting upon is, how easy or difficult is it for you to verbalize your own needs and wants in a regulated and kind way? Again, this is what we're hoping our kids to do, right? Can you say please when you ask for the glass of milk? Can you tell me with your words what you need? And so one of the skills as a parent who's leading through our actions is, how am I showing up and able to do that in my daily life? Another question is, how often am I finding joy and peace in my daily life, even within activities that aren't preferred? How are you showing this through your words and your body? I have a parent I'm working with right now who having a clean kitchen is really important to them, and doing the dishes is something that's sort of an important part of this for them. And we have been spending time being able to find a sense of calm in the activity of doing dishes, right? Which is kind of a chore, something we have to do every day. And how are we showing up doing the dishes that brings us a sense of regulated calm so that we can model this? And then the last reflection question that I have for you are, what are the strategies that I use when I'm distressed? And how do I respond to others? Right? So in those really tough moments, those moments of distress, those moments when everything's going wrong, we woke up late for school, somebody broke and spilled something, what are those strategies I'm using for myself? How am I responding to others? How am I modeling that ability to manage my distress for my child? There's no right or wrong way to respond here. What I'm looking for and what I'm asking you to consider is finding a deeper understanding of ourselves and our parenting experience. And then one strategy that I'd love to leave you with is, when your child is challenged or in distress, can you imagine how you hope they are able to respond when they are in their adult brain, right? In however many years that they are in that they are before they become an adult, where their adult brain is finally fully developed at the age of 25. And then how can you, either with or without words, respond as a parent in a way that models what you're hoping for them to respond, and still honor their current situation, right? So if your child is really, 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 really disappointed because you had to say no to going with a friend, and you hope eventually, when they aren't able to go do something because their boss just asked them to work, that they might verbalize disappointment, that they might take a deep breath, that they might do a little activity that helps them reset, and that they're able to move on. And if that's the case, how can you respond as a parent in order to model that in that moment for your child when they can't go play with a friend, right? We might take a deep breath. We might verbalize that they look disappointed, and we might do something little to help them reset so that they can get that skill internalized through our leadership as a parent. Now, note, this is not just teaching. It's using communication, regulation, emotional responses that you hope will eventually be on board as they mature into adults. This is leadership in parenting. If you'd like more information about our parent coaching work over at Thriving Parents Collective, check out the link in our show notes. I think I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you.
Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.